Your thoughts could make you sick. 75 to 90% of every person that goes to a healthcare facility in the Western world goes in because of psychological or emotional stress. That's 8 or 9 out of 10. Living in stress is living in survival, and stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of homeostasis. Stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of balance. The stress response is what the body innately does to return itself back to balance. The problem is that if you keep turning on that fight or flight system, you keep turning on that emergency system, you'll actually cause people to stay out of balance, and that imbalance becomes the new balance, and they're headed for some type of disease, some type of breakdown. No organism can tolerate emergency mode for an extended period of time, and when you're in survival and that primitive system is switched on, it's really about the self. When you're in survival, you have to take care of yourself. So the emotions of anger and hostility and aggression and competition and frustration and resentment and envy and jealousy and insecurity and fear and anxiety and hopelessness and powerlessness and depression and pain and suffering, guilt and shame are all derived from the hormones of stress, and psychology calls them normal human states of consciousness. Those are altered states of consciousness. And when we're in that state, when we're living in survival, we experience separation. We divide in a lot of ways. And so there's biology that goes along with that, and the hormones of stress heighten the senses. In a lot of ways, we turn into more of a primitive self. So hard to change that, especially when you don't have enough money, or you just lost your job, or you just ended a relationship, or your best friend passed. It's really hard to move beyond those emotional states. And so I think that teaching people how to change those emotional states and move out of those are really important. And if it's not T-Rex that's chasing you, but it's your coworker in the next cubicle, what was once very adaptive becomes very maladaptive. And the rush of those adrenal hormones become kind of addictive to people. And they use the problems, they use the conditions in their life to reaffirm their addiction to that emotion. They need their enemy to feel hatred. And if their enemy died, they'd still feel hatred, or they'd find another one. They need the bad relationship. They need the bad job in order to feel. And that's why it's hard to change. And people become addicted to the life they don't even like. And so if you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, by thinking about your problems, and that's the truth, you can become addicted to your own thoughts. And if the long-term effects of the hormones of stress push the genetic buttons that create disease, your thoughts could make you sick. And then the question is, if your thoughts could make you sick, can your thoughts make you well? And we're actually discovering that that's absolutely possible. The model of change is unlearning and relearning. It's breaking the habit of the old self and reinventing a new self. It's pruning synaptic connections and sprouting new connections. It's unfiring and unwiring, refiring and rewiring, deprogramming and reprogramming, losing your mind and creating a new one. What thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? Let me become familiar with those. What behaviors do I want to demonstrate? What would greatness do? What would love do? And actually rehearse a greater way. Rehearse it enough times so that you could actually step into that footprint. Teach your body emotionally that there's another way to feel, and do it over and over again. It'll become familiar to you. Turns out if you teach people how to do that, in 7 days you can see very profound biological changes if they immerse themselves into the experience.
And what do those biological changes look like?
And there are dramatic changes in the way their brain works, very significant changes. Some of them are really outstanding changes. We teach people how to create more heart code. When you feel anger, when you feel frustration, when you feel impatience, when you feel resentment, your heart beats out of order. When you feel gratitude, when you have kindness and care, when you feel love for life, your heart beats in a more orderly fashion. You can actually train somebody to get good at feeling that way. And we use that, and we see people at the end of 7 days be able to regulate their heart much better. And it's a function of really how soon or how slow we age. We take blood and we measure 2,882 different metabolites in a person's blood. And at the end of 7 days, we measure again. And I can tell you that if you're a novice meditator, really never meditated before, kind of your first event, and you go through that 7-day process, at the end of 7 days, there's so many biological changes that are taking place in the collective in the community, not just one, not just two, the majority of people, and I mean a significant majority of people, suggesting that their body literally is living in a new environment, in a new life. And there are chemicals in their bloodstream in terms of information that wasn't there prior to the event. In other words, some way, without taking any drug, without taking any exogenous substance, without changing their diet, without changing their lifestyle in any other way except going through this process, eating the same foods that they typically eat, that at the end of 7 days, there's chemistry, there's biology that suggests that somehow their biology is changing significantly. So then teaching people then a little bit about how to manage their emotional state and to self-regulate, I think is a great gift for people, because when they begin to break an addiction to any emotion or the conditioning of any emotion, there's going to be cravings that go on just like any addict. And many people overdose, and many people have bad trips, and so when they start changing and the body's craving those familiar emotions, the body starts signaling the brain, of memories, or to think certain ways and to make certain choices, do certain things, crave certain experiences just to feel that same emotion. And people say, well, this feels right. No, that feels familiar. That really feels familiar. And many people will tell the story of why they feel that way based on some past experience. And it's usually not in the recent past. It's usually many years ago.
Like a toxic relationship or something.
Whatever that is. And so they're basically saying, I had an event in my life, and since that event, I'm still living by the same emotion and I haven't been able to change. And they'll tell the story of that past. And in psychology, the latest research on memory shows that 50% of that story isn't even the truth. They're making it up because they don't have the same brain as they had then. And so then people are reliving a miserable life they never even had just to excuse themselves from changing. And they embellish the stories so that it sounds really hard to change. So what is that point then for a person when they say, the only person that this emotion of hatred or anger or frustration or resentment, the only person that this is hurting is me? Because those chemicals are down-regulating genes and creating disease. And the person finally really realizes that, and they really decide to change. When they overcome the emotion, the memory without the emotion is called wisdom. And that's the name of the game in three-dimensional reality. Now they're ready for a new experience. It's not reliving the past. You don't need to. You don't need to talk about it. All you need to do is overcome the emotion. When you overcome the emotion, you're free from the past. You can see it from a greater level of consciousness. And that's when a person, so many times when they truly change, they'll say this. We've seen it over and over again. They reach that point where they finally break through, and some of them have had some really difficult pasts. They'll say, I would not want to change one thing in my past because it brought me to this moment. That's the moment the past no longer exists. And they can look at their betrayers and see it all had to happen for that moment. And now they're free. They no longer belong to the past. They belong to the future.
I've never heard the concept or idea of being addicted to a negative emotion. People talk to me about being addicted to dopamine and pleasure and, and all those things, like masturbation and sugar, but the thought of being addicted to a negative emotion, it's what you said to me earlier about the guilt.
Well, think about this. What do people do when they feel an emotion? What do? They rely on something outside of them to make that emotion go away. So whether it's the masturbation or the pornography or the gambling or the shopping or the sugar or the whatever, it's all because they're trying to make that feeling go away. And they're using something outside of them. So then there is some emotion that the person is regulating. That's why they're doing that. So change the emotional state, and it makes sense then the need to do it diminishes.
Doesn't seem to be very easy to do, change my emotional state.
Well, again, I think if you understood what you were doing and why you were doing it, just like learning anything, if you understood a formula, I think it wouldn't be as hard as you think it is. I mean, because there is a way to change. Our research is pretty outstanding because there's not a whole lot of drugs as effective. And we've discovered that the nervous system makes a pharmacy of chemicals right now that works better than any drug. That's what we've discovered.